Okay, so hello everyone. Today is Thursday, May the 18th, and excuse me. And we are continuing in our reading of the Book of Longings. So Sakina, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Let's just become still for a few moments. Take a few deep breaths. Inhaling love and light, truth and peace. And exhaling any of the challenges or events that you had today that you can let go of and just move forward and just prepare some space in your mind and your heart to receive whatever it is you are hearing that resonates with you, whether it's coming from what you're physically hearing or from what you're internally hearing. And as we take these few breaths, let us know that we are channels manifesting light and love, and that we can fill ourselves with inspiration and then release it to share with others. For that's what makes us divine, is the ability to listen to the still small voice within and then allow it to resonate in our daily lives. We let it be so, and so it is.
And so
That was
it is.
beautiful. Thank you.
Well, we're going to pick up on page 136 in chapter 35. Having no father or elder brother, Jesus bore the responsibility of arranging his own betrothal. He promised to return in the morning to speak with my father, a pledge that rendered me almost impervious to the anger I encountered when I entered the house. In retaliation for my refusal to be his concubine, the tetrarch had demoted father from head scribe and counselor to a mere scribe among many other mere scribes. It was a dazzling fall from favor. Father was livid with me. I couldn't feel bad for him. His willingness to hand me over first to Nathaniel, then to Herod Antipas, had severed the last tie that bound me to him. I knew somehow he would find a way to ingratiate himself to Antipas once again and recover his position. I would be proven right about that. As father berated me that night, mother paced back and forth, interrupting him with outbursts of fury. They didn't even know yet that the good citizens of Sepphoris had nearly stoned me to death for reasons of thievery, fornication, and blasphemy. I decided to let them discover this on their own. Do you think of no one but yourself? Mother shrieked. Why do you persist in these shameful acts of disobedience? Would you rather I become Herod Antipas' concubine? I asked, genuinely shocked. Would that not be an act even more shameful? I would rather you had. She cut herself off, leaving the rest unspoken, but hanging conspicuously in the air. I would rather you had never been born. A palace courier arrived the following morning before father broke his fast. I was perched on the balcony awaiting Jesus' arrival when Lavi ushered the messenger into father's study. Had father struck some deal with Herod Antipas during the night? Would I be dragged off to become his concubine after all? Where was Jesus? Their meeting was short. I stepped away from the rail as father emerged. When the courier departed, his voice drifted up to me. I know you're there, Anna. I peered down. He looked defeated, his posture slumping toward the floor. He said, last evening I sent a message imploring Herod to set aside your refusal and take you for his concubine anyway, hoping the humiliation you'd caused him might have subsided. His response has just arrived. He ridiculed me for thinking he would condescend to have you in his palace after you were nearly stoned in the street. You might have told me of this and saved me from further disgrace. He shook his head in disbelief. A stoning. The city will be set against us even more. You have ruined us. Had I dared, I would have asked if he cared at all that I'd endured a harrowing experience from death. I would have told him it was Chusa he should blame for the stoning, not me, that I held my tongue. He walked back toward his study, a man utterly vanquished, then stopped midway. Without turning, he spoke. I do give thanks you were unharmed. I'm told it was the builder who prevented your death. Yes, his name is Jesus. And he spoke to the crowd of becoming your betrothal. Yes. Would you welcome that, Anna? I would, Father, with all my heart. When Jesus arrived soon afterward, Father wrote and signed a contract of betrothal without consulting Mother. Jesus would pay the humble bride price of 30 shekels and would feed, clothe, and shelter my aunt, who would accompany me. There would be no betrothal ceremony. The wedding would be a simple transfer from my father's house to my husband's in 30 days, on the 3rd of Nisan, the shortest time allowed. Any comments? Okay. I think we all kind of chuckled at the mother's response.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I'm still munching.
Okay.
But that was kind of sad to hear her mother say something like that.
Yeah. But she was a woman, remember, who didn't really want children and just did it for the sake of their beliefs at the time.
Socially, she actually married up.
Yes.
Anna's mother, that is.
Yes. This next section takes place in Nazareth from 17 to 27 CE. The day I entered Jesus's house, his family stood in a silent clump in the courtyard, watching as Lavi led the cart containing me, my aunt, and our belongings through the gate. There were 4 of them, 2 men besides Jesus, and 2 women, one of whom rested her hand across her nearly impeccable pregnant belly. Do you think we have the spaciousness of a palace? I heard the pregnant one say. To my mind, we brought a bare handful of possessions. I'd packed the plainest of my clothes, one ordinary silver headband, my copper mirror, an ornamental brass comb, 2 red woolen rugs, undyed bed coverings, my incantation bowl, and most precious of all, my cedar chest. Inside it were my scrolls, reed pens, a sharpening knife, 2 vials of ink, and the ivory sheet that had nearly gotten me stoned. The clean papyri my father had obtained for me were gone. I'd exhausted them during the brief writing frenzy that had commenced soon after retrieving my possessions from the cave. Yalta had brought even less than I. 3 tunics, her bed mat, the sistrum, and the Egyptian scissors. Still, we were a spectacle. Over my protest, Father had sent us off in a cart drawn by a royally bedecked horse from Herod Antipas' stable. I'm sure he wanted to impress the Nazarenes, to remind them that Jesus was wedding far above his standing. I offered my new family a smile, hoping to endear myself, but a cart lined with fine woolen rugs, pulled by an imperial horse, led by a servant, did nothing to help my cause. Jesus had met us on the village outskirts, and even he frowned before greeting us. To worsen matters, Father had also forbidden the wedding under his roof. It was customary for the chuppah to be in the bride's house, but he feared annoying Antipas by hosting a marriage the tetrarch was certain to resent. Nor did Father want village peasants in his house. His refusal to host Jesus and his family must have been a terrible insult to them. And who knew what tales might have reached them of my fornicating, thieving, and blasphemy. I let my eyes drift about the little compound. 3 small dwellings were cobbled together within the enclosure, built from stacked stones and held together with mud. I counted 5 or 6 rooms opening onto the courtyard. A ladder led to the rooftops, which were covered with reed bundles and packed mud. And I wondered if Yalta and I would be able to sit up there and share our secrets. I quickly scanned the courtyard. An oven strewn with pots and utensils, firewood, dung pile, mortar, and pestle loom. There was a sun-cooked vegetable garden and a little stable with 4 chickens, 2 sheep, and a goat, a single olive tree. I took it all in. This is where I'll live. I tried not to feel the shock that undulated through me. His family huddled in the shade of the lone tree. I wondered where Jesus' sister was, the one from the market, the yarn spinner. His mother wore a colorless tunic and a pale yellow headscarf with wisps of dark hair escaping the edges. I guessed her to be near the age of my mother, but she was far more frayed by her years. Her face, so like her son, was well worn from chores and childbearing. She had a slight rounding in her shoulders, and the corners of her mouth had begun to droop slightly. But I thought how lovely she looked standing there with the sun filtering through the leaves, coins of light on her shoulders. Jesus' confession to me in the cave slipped into my thoughts. In Nazareth, some say I'm Mary's son, but Joseph's, but not, I'm sorry. In Nazareth, some say I'm Mary's son, not Joseph's. They say I was born from my mother's fornication. Others say my father is Joseph, that I was illicitly conceived before my parents married. Excuse me. Yes, dear. My finger hurts. Okay, let me kiss your boot. Which one? This one? Okay. All right. Why don't you sit on the chair? Okay. Sorry about that. Welcome, Anna, she said, coming to embrace me. My daughter, Salome, was married only a few weeks ago and lives now in Becerra. One daughter has gone and another has come. There was a plaintive note beneath her smile, and it occurred to me that not only had her daughter left, but her husband had died only 6 months before. The 2 men were Jesus's brothers, James, 19, and Simon, 17, both dark-skinned and thick-haired like Jesus, with the same short beards and posture. The wide stance, arms crossed, but their eyes had none of the passion and depth Jesus's did. The pregnant woman with the prickly tongue was Judith, married to James, whose age I would discover was 15, the same as mine. They looked at me with mute stares. Yalta removed her bridle. One would think a two-headed sheep had arrived in your midst. I winced. Greet my Aunt Yalta. Jesus grinned. She's imprudent, James said to Jesus, as if she wasn't standing there. Rankled, I said. It's what makes her so dear to me. Jesus, I would discover, was a peacemaker and a provocateur in equal measure, but one would never say which he would be at any given moment. In this moment, he became the peacemaker. You're welcome here, both of you. You are our family now. You are indeed, Mary said. Judith remained silent, as did Jesus' brothers. My aunt's honesty had laid the friction bare. Okay, excuse me just a second. Come here, Elijah.
There's nothing there.
Excuse me just a minute.
She says her finger, there's nothing there.
Come here.
Yeah, no problem. Take your time.
You want to sit on my lap? Which finger? This one? Better? Okay. All right. Okay, you gonna read with me? Okay.
Oh, yes, that one.
When the cart was unpacked, I bid Lavi goodbye. I will miss you, friend, I told him. Be well, he said, and his eyes watered, causing mine to do the same. I watched him lead the horse through the gate, listening to the clatter of the empty wagon. When I turned back, the family had dispersed. Only Yalta and Jesus stood there. He took my hand, and the world righted herself. We were to marry that same day when the sun set, but without ceremony. There would be no procession, no virgins raising their oil lamps and calling out for the groom, no singing, no feasting. By law, a marriage was the act of sexual union, nothing more and nothing less. We would become husband and wife in the solitude of each other's arms, not allowed to enter the chuppah beforehand. I spent the afternoon in the store. What's next? Excuse me again. Oh, I see. I see. Okay.
What'd you do? I didn't see nothing there.
All right. I see you got a splinter. Hang on.
Oh, shit.
Okay. All right. Is that better? All right. You want some chocolate now? You want some hot chocolate? You want to lay on the couch? No. All right. Okay. Can Yama go on?
I'm gonna pause it for a minute, okay? Y'all take your time.
Okay. Not allowed to enter the chuppah beforehand, I spent the afternoon in the storeroom where Yalta had spread her bed mat. Mary had offered to share her room with Yalta, but she declined, preferring to be on her own amid storage jars, food provisions, wool shares, and tools. Do they think we have the spaciousness of a palace? I said when we were alone, mimicking any soon-to-be sister-in-law. Yalta said, she's impertinent, mocking James' assessment of her. We fell upon each other laughing. I put my finger to my lips. Shh, we'll be heard. Am I required to be well behaved and quiet? Never, I replied. I began to meander about the little room, touching the tools, running my thumb across a stained dye vat. Are you worried about entering the chupa? Yalta asked. I suppose I was. What girl wasn't nervous her first time? But I shook my head. As long as I don't concede, I will welcome it. Welcome it then, for you will have no worries there. Yalta had procured black seed oil for me from a midwife in Sepphoris, a foul liquid more potent than anything my mother had used. I'd been swallowing it for a week. We'd agreed she would conceal it here among her things. Most men knew nothing of the ways in which women avoided pregnancy. When it came to children, they didn't much consider the agony of birth and the possibility of death. They thought instead of God's mandate to be fruitful and multiply. It seemed to be a command God had devised with men in mind, and it was the only one they were universally good at obeying. I didn't think Jesus was like other men, but I determined for now to keep the black seed oil to myself. When it was time, I dressed in a dark blue tunic that my aunt pronounced bluer than the Nile. She smoothed out the wrinkles with her hands and placed the silver headband on my forehead. I draped a white linen shawl over my head. At exactly sunset, I entered the chuppah where Jesus waited. Stepping inside the mud-walled room, I was greeted by the smell of clay and cinnamon and a dim mesma pierced with a beam of orange light falling from a high window. This will be our abode, Jesus said, stepping back with a sweep of his arm. He wore his blue tasseled cloak. His hair was damp from washing. The room had been arranged with care, whether by Jesus or by the woman. I didn't know. My red rugs had been spread across the dirt floor. Two bed mats lay side by side, sprinkled with ground cinnamon, one freshly woven. My mirror, comb, and a neat stack of my clothes had been placed on a bench with my chest of cedar set into a corner. My incantation bowl sat on a small oak table beneath the window for all the world to see. So exposed, I had an irrational urge to hide it somewhere. Okay, just a minute. But I forced myself to remain still. I said, if you inspected my bowl, I'm sure you saw the graven image inside it. I drew it myself. Yes, I saw, he answered. I watched for traces of condemnation on his face. It doesn't offend you. I'm more concerned with what's in your heart than what's in your bowl. To look into the bowl is to see into my heart. He walked over and peered into it. Could he read Greek? Taking the bowl in his hand, he turned it as he read aloud, Lord our God, hear my prayer, the prayer of my heart. Looking up, he held my gaze a moment before continuing. Bless the largeness inside me, no matter how I fear it. Bless my reed pens and my inks. Bless the words I write. May they be beautiful in your sight. May they be visible to your eyes, not yet born. When I am dust, sing these words over my bones. She was a voice. He set the bowl back on the table and smiled at me, and I felt the unbearable ache of loving him. I went to him, and there on the thin straw mats in the crumbles of light, I knew my husband, and he knew me. Okay, I'm going to pause there for just a moment.
Okay, go ahead.
That's something. I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, we ended with she knew him and he knew her. The morning after I became his wife, I woke to hear him repeating the Shama or the Shema. And then a woman's voice in the courtyard calling, Anna, it's time to milk the goat. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, Jesus intoned. Can you hear me? The voice called. The goat is in need of milking. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Anna, the goat. I lay still, eyeing Jesus across the room, ignoring the urgent need for goat milk, listening to his voice rise and fall, the quiet song of it. Somehow, in my privileged ignorance, it hadn't occurred to me that I would be given an equal share of the chores. The thought was faintly alarming. I'd arrived here unskilled at every conceivable task assigned to women. Jesus faced the window, his back to me. When he lifted his palms, I glimpsed his arms rippled beneath his tunic. The sight summoned forth the memory of last night, moments so innermost and beautiful. They caused an exquisite ache inside me. I let out an involuntary moan, and he finished his prayer and came to sit on the mat beside me. He said, Do you always sleep so late? I propped on my elbows, tilting my face to his, and tried to look both coy and innocent. It's not my fault. I was kept awake last night. Laughter, his laughter rebounded from the walls to the ceiling, then out through the little window, pushing the mass and tangle of hair from my face. He drew me against his chest. Anna, Anna, you have awakened me and made me alive. And you have done the same to me, I said. I have only one fear in being here. He cocked his head. And what is that? I have no idea how to milk a goat. He laughed his uproarious laugh once more and pulled me to my feet. Get dressed and I will show you. The first thing you must learn is that this is a very peculiar goat. She only eats winter figs, almond blossoms, and barley cakes, and insists on being fed by hand and having her ears scratched. He carried on like this while I slipped a tunic over my undergarment and tied a scarf around my head, giggling at him under my breath. He was still traveling to Sepphoris to work on the theater, and it seemed he should have been on his way by now, but he appeared to be in no hurry. Wait, I said as he started up toward the door. Opening my chest, I retrieved a small pouch from which I pulled the red thread. Can you guess where I acquired this? His brow wrinkled. It fell from your sleeve the day we met in the market, I said. And you kept it? I did, and I shall wear it every day while you're away. I held my arm. Tie it on for me. As he wrapped it about my wrist, he returned to his teasing. Am I so faint in your thoughts that when I'm away, you need this reminder? Without this thread, I would forget I had a husband altogether. Then keep it close, he said, and kissed my cheeks. We found Judith in the stable. The goat was standing defiantly in the water trough, daring the sheep to drink. She was a dainty creature with a white body, a black face, a white beard, and wide-spaced eyes, one of which rotated in and the other out. I thought her outrageously funny looking. She is a menace, Judith said. I find her endearing, I replied. My sister-in-law made a diversive noise. Then you won't mind then you won't mind inheriting her care. I don't mind, I said, but I need instruction. Sighing, she looked at Jesus as if they might commiserate together over my stupidity. He took my hand, letting his thumb rub against the thread. I should go, as it is so, as it is. I'll have to walk at a quick pace so as not to be late. Your mother has packed your meal, Judith told him, glancing accusingly at me, and I realized that task too belonged to me. I'd never cooked anything but ink. When he left us, Judith lifted the goat from the water trough, provoking kicks, bleats, and a splatter of water, and dropped her roughly onto the ground. I watched as the animal lowered her head and butted Judith's thigh. Already I felt an affinity with the creature. During those first months, it was plain to everyone, including me, that I'd spent my life as a pampered rich girl. Yalta was of little help. She'd read Socrates, but knew nothing about pounding grain into flour or drying flax. Jesus' mother gathered me under her wing, trying to teach me, and protected me as best she could from Judith's reproaches, which gurgled like an unceasing spring of, I didn't light the dung fire correctly. I left chaff on the wheat. I left wool on the sheep. I could not cook porridge without scorching the lentils. My goat cheese tasted like hooves. Judith complained of me even more ferociously than others were about, notably my husband, telling him once that I was less useful than a lame camel. She not only disparaged my domestic skills, but I half suspected her of efforts to disrupt them. When it was my turn to pound the wheat, the pistol went missing. When I laid the fire, oddly, the dung was wet. Once, when Mary instructed me to latch the gate, it miraculously unlatched itself, and the chickens escaped. The only task I excelled at was caring for the goat, whom I named Delilah. I fed her fruit and cucumbers and brought her a little basket that she liked to toss about with her head. I talked to her. Hello, girl. Do you have milk for me today? Are you hungry? Do you want your ears scratched? Do you find Judith as annoying as I do? And she occasionally responded with a string of bleats. Some days I tied a piece of rope about her neck and fastened it to my girdle, and she accompanied me as I went about my chores. And I waited for the sun to slope toward the hills and Jesus to return. At the sight of him, Delilah and I would rush to the gate, where I embraced him, oblivious to the stares of his family. James and Simon took fun in mocking our devotion, which Jesus took in stride, laughing with them. There was truth in their teasing, but I didn't find it as good-natured as my husband. They taunted him out of jealousy. Simon, 2 years from having a wife, was eager for the intimacies of marriage, and James and Judith's unison was like that of 2 yoked oxen. Any comments? We go on?
How old is Jesus supposed to be?
According to
Have you
this,
seen-
he's supposed to be in his 20s.
Oh, okay.
In his 20s, because this goes, he didn't start basically his ministry until he was like 33.
But
And
30.
this is
Mhm.
He was 30 when
17 to 27.
So he was 27?
Well, the years
When
of this, it goes to 27, this section here. It goes from the year 17 CE to 27 CE. So he's in his 20s.
Okay.
I would say early 20s at that.
Yeah.
That's the impression that I get anyway.
Yeah, well, that's somewhere else back here that I had read was, he was 20 or so. One hot day in the month of Yule, while the courtyard baked, I milked Delilah in the stable, then placed the ewer of frothy milk outside the gate where the sheep couldn't capsize it. When I turned back, Delilah was in the water trough again. She'd taken to standing and sometimes sitting in it for long periods. I made no effort to deter her. I thought of climbing in myself. As Mary approached us with a basket of grain, however, I tried to lure her out. Leave her, she said, chuckling. She looked tired and flushed with heat. Now that Judith's time was near, we'd taken over her portion of the chores, the bulk of which fell to Mary, since I was still an apprentice. I took the basket from her. Even I could toss grain to chickens. She leaned against the gate. Do you know what we should do, Anna? Just the two of us? We should go to the village mikvah and immerse ourselves. Yalta can remain here with Judith in case the baby decides to come. I gestured at Delilah. I know, I envy her too. She laughed. Let's shirk our work and go. A lovely impish light had come into her eyes. The line of women had formed outside the stone enclosure that housed the pool, not because they'd suddenly grown devout, but because, like us, they craved a respite from the heat. We joined it, clutching our drying rags and clean tunics. Mary called out a greeting to the toothless old midwife, who would soon attend Judith, and was greeted in return, but without enthusiasm. The women ahead of us stole glances at me, whispering and holding themselves stiffly, and I realized that my ill repute had followed me from Sepharis. I couldn't tell if Mary noticed or if, for my sake, she pretended not to. When we stepped inside the cool dwelling and descended into the mikvah, the women's undertones grew louder. Yes, it's the chief scribe's daughter, the one sent away for promiscuity. They say she was nearly stoned for thievery. What reason could Mary's son have for marrying her? Overhearing their gossip, the women behind us, including the midwife, refused to enter the water after me, preferring to wait until I vacated. My cheeks stung with humiliation, not because I cared what this puerile gaggle of women thought, but because Mary had witnessed the indignities. Pay them no mind, she told me. Turn the other cheek. But the lovely light had gone from her eyes. As we walked home, she said, Jesus and I have also been the recipients of this kind of malice. They called me promiscuous too. They said Jesus was conceived before my marriage, and some said he didn't belong to Joseph. I didn't tell her James had spoken to me of these things. I waited for her to refute their accusations, but she said nothing, refusing to defend herself. She took my hand as we walked, and I felt how difficult, how bold, how loving it was for her to bear herself to me like this. Jesus suffered more than I, she said. He was branded as a child who was born outside of marriage. Some in the village shun him to this day. As a boy, he would come home from synagogue school with bruises and scrapes, always getting into a fight with his tormentors. I told him what I told you, pay them no mind, and turn the other cheek. Their hearts are boulders and their heads are straw. I've heard Jesus use those same words. He learned well, and his suffering didn't harden him. He's always a marvel when one's pain doesn't settle into bitterness, but brings forth kindness instead. I think the marvel has a lot to do with his mother, I told her. She patted my arm and turned her concern back to me. I know you suffer too, Anna, not just from gossip and scandal, but daily at the hands of Judith. I'm sorry she makes it difficult for you. I can do nothing right in her eyes. She envies your happiness. Abruptly, she guided us off the path to a fig tree and motioned for me to sit in the green shade. There's a story I must tell you, she said. Last year, when Jesus was close to 20, well before you came along, Joseph attempted to betroth him. My husband was ailing then, weak and short of breath, with the blue hue about his mouth. She paused, closing her eyes, and I saw the freshness of her grief. I think he knew he would die soon, and it spurred him to fulfill his duty and find him first son a wife. A memory stirred. That evening, Jesus had asked me to become his betrothed. He'd said his father had tried to arrange a marriage for him, but he hadn't agreed to it. Judith's father, Uriah, owns a small parcel of land and keeps sheep, even hiring 2 shepherds, Mary said. He was a friend to Joseph, one who paid no attention to lingering stories of Jesus' birth. Joseph intended to seek a betrothal for Jesus with Judith. The revelation dazed me. Of course, it never happened, she continued. Our son had some notion he wouldn't marry at all. That was a great shock to us. Not to marry would have made him even more of a parish. We pleaded with him, but his reason had to do with God's wishes, and he asked his father not to approach Uriah. Joseph complied. The sunlight broke through the limbs, and I frowned more from confusion than the glare. Why should Judith be envious of me if she knows nothing about this? But she does know Joseph had been so assured of the betrothal. He had already hinted his intention to Uriah. Judith's mother came to me, saying her daughter was pleased at the notion. Joseph, poor man, he felt to blame and was relieved when James offered to betroth Judith instead. James was barely 19, so young. Naturally, the story spread throughout Nazareth. How embarrassed Judith must have been, getting the second born because the firstborn declined. How hard it must have been for her to see me ride through the gate only months later. Jesus believed his decision was right, Mary was saying. Still, he felt sorry for the shame it caused Judith's family, and he went to Uriah and humbled himself, saying he meant no disrespect, that he was uncertain if he would marry at all, that he still wrestled with God over it. He praised Judith as worthy, her price far above rubies. This satisfied Uriah. It didn't apparently satisfy Judith. I was squeezing a handful of my tunic so tightly that when I let go, my knuckles throbbed. Jesus had told me nothing of this. Mary read my thought. My son didn't want to burden you with this. He believed it would make it more difficult for you, but I thought it would help you understand Judith better and perhaps make it easier. I said, I'm sure you are right, but all I could think was that my husband had a separate place inside himself where he kept certain privacies that I would never know. But did I not also have such a place? Mary got to her feet, and when I stood too, she faced me. I'm glad my son changed his mind about marriage. I don't know if it was God who changed it or if it was you. She cradled my cheeks in her hands. I've never seen him so glad of heart as he is now. As we walked on, I told myself I would let Jesus have his hidden place. That was his alone. We had our togetherness. Why should we not have our separateness? Any comments?
No, I just find it interesting that women, even in ancient times, had their little secrets, so to speak.
Mhm.
Oh, this look messy to me.
You think so?
Yes, yes. She was in, the Judith who is married to James, pregnant by James, was supposed to marry Jesus. She is obviously in love with Jesus. She don't love James. What a mess. What a mess. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what?
Why?
Huh? Say that again.
I was going to say it explains why. It explains why Judith's comment to Anna were such when she arrived, and and her treatment of Anna. It explains that a little bit, knowing this.
You mean
backstory.
Judith? Yeah, Judith. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean,
It
explains it, but I'm just saying, what a mess. What a mess. I mean, that even that she thought of that this plot, so something about this is obviously going to have to happen somewhere in the future, because Judith has this like undercurrent about her, so she's finding fault with something that she don't, that nobody even has anything to do with. I mean, that's just what somebody, that's just what her dad, that's something that she wanted,
Right.
so
right. And Mary is saying, this explains why she's jealous. She's explaining this is why Judith's the way she is.
Yeah,
and why she is the way she is towards Anna, you mean?
Yeah. So I would just want to know, I'm interested in seeing where this development in the plot is going to take us. Why is it so messy from the beginning?
What makes for a good story.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but don't you want to know what's going to happen in the future? I mean, why is it messy like this? You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I always like to see how things like that unfold.
Right. It's showing the humanness. For eons, people have put Jesus on this pedestal that Jesus never asked to be put on. And even though this is a novel and it's all very possible, and that it kind of shows that human side of Jesus, that he was a human being that walked on earth. And it helps us to understand that we too are human beings walking on earth, but have been given the same gifts that Jesus was given. It's just that in our own way, we may not be using them as fully as Jesus used them. And we're just now starting to acknowledge that, we could possibly walk on water. We could heal the sick and the lame. And in a sense, we are doing that by some of the knowledge that we're learning, how to do like the prosthetic feet and that type of thing. It's causing people who've been wheelchairs to actually not be able to walk and that type of thing. So in a way, it's showing that Jesus went through some of the same things that other men are going through, and that the women of that time went through some of the same things that women are still going through at this time.
Mhm.
All right.
Okay, you ready to go on?
Sure.
Okay. I began to slip away from the straw mat while Jesus slept, light a lamp, and creak open my chest. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, trying to make no sound, I would stretch out one of my papyri and read. I often wondered if Jesus had ever opened my cedar chest and peered inside it. We'd never spoken of the contents, and though he'd read the prayer in my bowl and knew the depth of my desire, he hadn't broached the topic again. One night he woke to find me huddled in the small spot of light, poring over my half-finished story of the Alta Travails to Alexandria, which I'd embarked upon during those last insufferable days before leaving Sepphoris. Coming to stand over me, he gazed into the open chest. These are the scrolls you buried in the cave? The question stopped my breath. Yes, there were 13 of them buried there, but shortly after digging them up, I added several more. My mind traveled to the 3 scrolls that contained my tales of terror. I held out the scroll I'd been reading and felt my hand shake. This one is an account of my aunt's life in Alexandria. I regret I wasn't able to finish it before running out of papyrus. As he took it, I realized this text, too, was replete with brutality. In it, I progressed no further than describing the mistreatment my aunt had endured at the hands of her husband, Rubel, and I spared no detail of his cruelty. I suppressed an urge to take the scroll back. No one had ever read my words but Yalta, and I suddenly felt barred, as if I'd been lifted out of my skin. Jesus sat beside me and leaned into the lamplight. Upon finishing, he said, "Your story caused your aunt suffering to lift off the pirates and enter inside me. I felt her suffering as my own, and she was made new to me." He stood in my chest, a kind of radiance that spread through my arms. "When I write, that's what I most hope for," I told him, struggling to remain composed. "The other scrolls contain stories such as this one?" he asked. I described my collection of narratives, even my tales of terror. "Yes, I'm sorry, tears. You will write again, Anna. One day you will." He was saying what had never been acknowledged out loud, that the privilege was not possible now. Even he, the eldest son, could not make a way for me to write and study, not in this poor compound in Nazareth, where there were no coins for papyri, where men scabbled for work and women toiled from daybreak to day's end. Women's duties and customs were inviolable here, more so than Sepphoris. The leisure and affront of making inks and writing words were as unthinkable as spinning gold from flax, but doing so would not be lost to me forever. And that's what he was telling me. He blew out the lamp and we returned to our mats. His words had flooded me with an odd mixture of hope and disappointment. I told myself I would put aside my desire, but it would wait. The thought saddened me, but from that night, I did not doubt he understood my longing. On the day that she and I had been married, a full year, Mary patted my belly and teased, "Have you got a baby in there?" Overhearing this, Jesus cast his mother an amused look that cut through me. Was he too waiting and hoping for a child? We were in the courtyard, huddled over an inventive new oven Jesus had made out of clay and straw. The three of us staring inside at balls of dough, clinging to its smooth, curved walls. Mary and I had taken turns throwing the fistfuls of dough against the sides while Jesus praised our efforts. Unsurprisingly, two of my dough balls had refused to stick and landed in the hot coals at the bottom. The smell of burned bread was everywhere. Across the compound, Judith stepped from her doorway and wrinkled her nose. Have you burned the bread again, Anna? She glanced sideways at Jesus. How do you know it was I who did so and not my mother-in-law? I asked. Oh, the same way I know it was your goat who ate my cloth and not the chickens. Of course, she would bring that up. I'd let Delilah roam free in the compound, and she'd eaten Judith's precious cloth. You would think I put the cloth on a plate and fed it to her. In a perfectly timed moment, Delilah emitted forlorn bleat and emitted a forlorn bleat, and Jesus broke into laughter. She overheard you, Judith, and wishes to be forgiven. Judith huffed away, her baby Sarah tied on her back. The child had been born 7 months ago, and already Judith was pregnant again. I felt a wave of pity for her. Mary was removing the small loaves from the oven, tossing them into a basket. I'll pack these for your journey, she said to Jesus. He would leave tomorrow as a journeyman, traveling from village to village as a stonemason and woodworker. The theater in Sepphoris was finished, and jobs there had disappeared as Herod Antipas erected a new capital to the north named Tiberias. For the Roman emperor, Jesus could have found employment there, of course, but Antipas had stupidly, wantonly built the city atop a cemetery, and only those who cared little for the purity laws would work there. My husband was an outspoken critic of the purity laws, probably too outspoken for his own good, but I think he'd been relieved to have reason not to be part of the patriarch's ambitious. I slid my arm up Jesus' waist as if to tether him. Not only will Delilah and I remain unforgiven, but my husband is leaving with all our bread, I said, making an effort to disguise my sadness. I wish you didn't have to go. If I had my, I would work for me, Nazareth. You know that. Don't people in Nazareth need plows and yokes and roof beams? Jobs here will go more readily to James and Simon than to me. I'll try not to remain away too long. I'll go first to Jaffa, and if I find no work there, I'll go on to, and I think this is pronounced Exola and Deberia. Jaffa, it was the village Tabitha had been banished to. A year and a half had passed since I'd seen her, but she was not gone from my thoughts. I told Jesus about her, holding nothing back. I'd even sung some of her songs for him. When you're in Jaffa, would you seek word of Tabitha for me? I asked. He hastened only slightly. I'll inquire about her, Anna, but the news, if there is any, may not be what you hope to hear. I scarcely heard him. Her song about the blind girls was playing unbidden in my head. I apologize, people.
That's okay.
In the afternoon, I found Jesus mixing mud brick mortar to repair the crumbling stone in the compound wall, mud to his elbows, and I couldn't bear to keep my secret from him any longer. I handed him a cup of water. I said, "Do you remember you told me some men possess inner knowledge that caused them to leave their families and go out as prophets and preachers?" He looked at me, bemused, squinting through the sunlight. "You thought that you yourself might even be among them," I continued. "Well, I too have my own knowing inside, that I'm not meant for motherhood, but for something else." Such an impossible thing to explain. You're talking about the prayer in your book, the stories you've written? Yes. I took his hand, even though they were caked. What if my words could, like men's prophesy or preach? Would that not be worth the sacrifice? I was so young, 16 then, and exorbitantly hopeful. I still believed I would not have long to wait. Some miracle would intervene. The sky would part. God would rain down papyri. I studied his face. I saw regret, uncertainty. Not to have children was considered a great misfortune, a thing worse than death. I thought suddenly of the law that permitted a man to divorce his childless wife after 10 years. But unlike my mother, I didn't fear that possibility. Jesus would never countenance such a law. My fear lay in disappointing him. "But do you need to make this sacrifice now?" he said. "There's time. Your writing will be there for you one day." I understood more clearly. When he said one day, he meant one far day. I do not word.
Say that
This was
again.
my
Say that again. Read that.
deepest secret.
Sakina, read that part again. You were broken up.
Okay. I understood more clearly when he said one day, he meant one faraway day. "I do not want children," I whispered. This was my deeper secret, but I'd never spoken it aloud. Good women had babies. Good women wanted babies. It was pressed upon every girl precisely what good women did and did not do. We lugged those dictates around like temple stones. A good woman was modest. She was quiet. She covered her head when she went out. She didn't speak with men. She tended her domestic tasks. She obeyed and served her husband. She was faithful to him. Above all, she gave him children. Better yet, sons. I waited for Jesus to respond, but he dipped his trowel in the mortar and smothered it over the stones. Had he ever wanted to be a good woman? Not once. I waited several moments, and when he didn't speak, I turned to leave. "Do you wish then to be, I'm sorry, do you wish then to get apart?" he asked. "No, oh no, but I do wish to use the midwife's herbs. I already take them." His eyes held mine for so long, I fought not to look away. They were tinged with disappointment that slowly softened, then ebbed. He said, "Little thunder, I won't judge the knowing in your heart or what choice you make." It was the first time he spoke the pet name he would call me until the end. I accepted it as an endearment. He heard the quake that lived at my center. and he didn't seek to silence it. Any comments?
No, I don't think so right now. Maybe in a minute. Let me listen to some more.
Okay.
Oh, well,
Go
I
ahead.
just find that interesting that, but then of course, nowadays, things like desire for children and all, and other important things that, are expected of a married couple are discussed. And of course, in many instances, there are long engagements and they might have known each other from childhood. So their desires for things like that would come out. But in this case, they only knew each other for a very short period of time. And I'm thinking maybe perhaps she was a little bit afraid to mention her non-desire for motherhood.
Yeah. I think it took some courage on her part too.
Yeah.
And that. And maybe also unbeknownst to Jesus and the reason and purpose that he was put on this earth, for not having children may have been a blessing in disguise for what he needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. The days he was away crept on tiny, unhurried feet. Sometimes in the evening, my feeling of aloneness was so great. I snuck Delilah into our room and fed her citrus peels. Other times I carried my mat to the storeroom and slept beside Yalta. I marked Jesus' absences with pebbles, adding one each day atop his sleeping mat, watching the little pile grow 9, 10, 11. On the 12th day, I woke knowing Jesus would return before dark, bearing some sort of propitious news. I couldn't concentrate on my task. In the afternoon, Mary came upon me, staring idly at a spider that dangled from the lip of a water jug. "Are you well?" she asked. "Jesus will come home today, I know it." She didn't question my certainty. She said, "Already his meal." I bathed myself and dabbed clove oil behind my ears. I let my hair loose and dressed in the dark blue tunic he loved. I poured wine and set out bread. Over and over, I went to the doorway and looked toward the gate, a blaze of yellow on the hill, the first grains of darkness floating in the air, dusk sulking across the compound. He arrived with the last trace of light, bearing his tools and enough wages to replenish our wheat stores and add a lamb to the stable. In the privacy of our room, he gathered me into his embrace. I smelled the weariness on him. Filling his cup, I said, "What tidings do you bring?" He described his days, the work he'd been hired to do. "And Tabitha, do you have any word of her?" He touched the bench beside him. "Sit." Was the news so grave I must sit to receive it? I sank down close to him. "I was hired by a man in Joppa to fashion a new door for his house. Everyone in the village knew of Tabitha, including the man's wife, who said that few had ever seen her and most feared her. When I asked why this was, she said Tabitha was possessed by demons and kept locked inside. This was not the favorable news I'd expected. "Would you take me to her?" "She's no longer there, Anna. The woman said she was sold to a man from Jericho, a landowner." "Sold? She's a slave in his house?" It seems so. I asked others in Joppa about her, and they told me the same story. I in his lap, and his hand stroked me down. Throughout the years that followed, I grew accustomed to Jesus' absences. The temporary loss of him became less like a spear in my side and more of a splinter in my foot. I went about my chores, relieved when I completed them, and could sit with Mary or Yalta and beg for stories of Jesus' boyhood or tales of Alexandria. I thought sometimes of my parents, an hour's walk away, and of Judas, who was I knew not where, and a gnawing forlornness would rise in me. There'd been no word from any of them. I tried not to think of Tabitha, enslaved to a stranger. Whenever Jesus was away, I wore the red thread on my wrist, as was my custom. But early in the spring, on a day when my mind could settle on nothing, I noticed how frayed the thread had become over the past year or so. Wizened, I feared it would soon wear apart. Touching it with my fingertip, I assured myself that if such a thing happened, it would signify nothing ominous. But then I thought of the ink splotch in my incantation bowl, the gray cloud over my head. It was hard to imagine that meant nothing. No, I would not risk a broken thread. I undid the knot and slid my tattered bracelet into its goatskin pouch. It was tight cord, and I heard Mary shout from the courtyard, "Come quickly, Jesus has returned." For the past 2 weeks, he'd been in Vizeras, making cabinets for a winemaker and staying with his sister Salome. I knew Mary was anxious for news of her daughter. "Salome is well," he reported, when the flurry of greetings had subsided. "But I have bitter news. Her husband has a weakness in his leg and arm and a slur in his voice. He no longer leaves the house." I looked at Mary, how she gathered herself, her arms wrapping about her sides, her body saying what her mouth did not. "Salome will be a widow soon." That night, all of us except Judith and the children huddled about the fire, speculating about Salome's husband and sharing stories. When the heat had nearly gone from the embers, James turned to Jesus. "Will you make the Passover pilgrimage for us this year?" Jesus, Simon, and Mary had traveled to the temple in Jerusalem the year before, while the rest of us stayed home to work and tend the animals. It was Jesus' turn to go, but he vacillated. "I don't yet know," he said, "but someone must go from our family." James responded, sounding annoyed. "Why do you hesitate? Can't you leave work behind for those few days?" "It isn't that. I'm struggling to understand if God wishes me to go at all. The temple has become a den of thieves, James." James rolled his eyes skyward. "Must you always concern yourself with such things? We have a duty to sacrifice an animal at Passover." "Yes, poor bring animals, and the priests refuse to accept them, claiming they're blemished, and then they charge exorbitant prices for another one." "What he says is true," Simon offered. "Shall we speak of something else?" Mary said. But Jesus pressed on. "The priests insist on having their own currency, and when the poor try to exchange their coins, the money changers charge them excessive rates." James stood. "Would you force me to make the trip again this year? Do you care more for the poor than your brother?" Jesus answered, "Aren't the poor also my brothers and sisters?" The next morning, as the sun stirred awake, Jesus trekked into the hills to pray. It was his daily habit. At other times, I would find him sitting cross-legged on the floor with his prayer shawl drawn over his head, unmoving, eyes closed. It had been so since we married. And this devotion, this feasting on God, and I'd never minded. But today, seeing him walk away in the half light, I understood what until now I'd only glimpsed. God was the ground beneath him, the sky over him, the air he breathed, the water he drank. It made me uneasy. I prepared his breakfast, trimming corn from the husk and put it over the oven, the sweet aroma drifting over the compound. I glanced repeatedly toward the gate as if God lurked out there, ready to pluck my husband from me. When he returned, we sat together beneath the olive tree. I watched him wrap bread around a hunk of goat cheese and eat hungrily, saving the corn, his favorite, for last. He was quiet. Finally, he said, when I saw my brothers-in-law, I'm sorry, let me reread that. When I saw my brother-in-law's infirmity, I was moved with pity. Everywhere I look, there's suffering. Anna and I spend my days making cabinets for a rich man. You spend your days caring for your family, I said, perhaps too sharply. He smiled. Don't worry, little thunder. I'll do what I must. He wrapped an arm about me. Passover is soon. Let us go to Jerusalem. We're going to stop there for just a minute, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, it's 8:26.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, time went by quickly.
You must have been having fun or something. Well, we could stop at that chapter if you want to.
Yeah, we can stop at that chapter there.
Probably because they're going to go to Jerusalem.
Right.
So
For the
Yeah.
Passover. So that's probably going to be interesting.
Yeah.
And notice he says we, or let
Yes.
us go to Jerusalem. So I'm assuming that's when he's including Anna as part of his party.
Yes. Yes. Oh, you're going to enjoy the rest of this. I'm sure.
Yeah, it seems pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, because so what are our thoughts about what we gleaned tonight, and how can we apply it to our lives?
Well, for me, it shows the courage that she had. It shows also how Mary, the softness and the tenderness that she had, and how in raising her children, her words seem to have stuck more with Jesus, because from what we've been taught and have learned of him, some of what he says were actually words that she said and shared with him, like turn the cheek.
Mhm.
Don't let what others say bother you. Don't let it corrupt your thinking and dwelling on it in that respect.
Mhm.
And the tenderness that she shows for Anna, and not knowing, all these womanly tasks that she needs to do, but showing her tenderness and her understanding of, well, I'll help you, I'll show you, I'll teach you. And by the same token, I think she too sensed the longing that Anna has to be fully a human being as opposed to just being a woman.
Mhm. Mhm. I guess for myself, what I guess I got from the story tonight is that um when we choose to include others, which I think that Jesus is doing with Anna now. I think he's being very inclusive of her, and it seems like that might be something unusual for that day and time, for a wife to be so inclusive, because it doesn't seem like uh, um, Judith and James are really, that understanding of one another. And there's so much jealousy around that, you can see that, where the intrigue is, going to be able to play a part in that. So it's kind of interesting. So yeah. What about you, Harriet?
I just find it fascinating that thousands of years later, women are having to endure some of the same expectations, I guess is the best way to put it, that women were, 2,000 years ago. And that's the attitude of society that kind of puts that burden on women. Unless we, and Anna is showing that, hey, I'm a liberated woman, in her own way, without being disrespectful. And I think that's what a lot of women are doing nowadays. They're showing that, hey, we are just as important in this society, and we make just as big a contribution as any man that is doing his duty for society, so to speak. I just find it very interesting. But the one thing that I guess I'll share it now, that I find fascinating about this whole story, the fact that Jesus had a wife, and whether he has children or not, that will soon be revealed. But the story that we have been told for thousands of years, based on the biblical story that we read, he was never married. He never knew a woman in that way. And this is how society, our society and societies before us, have painted this picture, and they don't want anything to disturb it. And I think that a narrow-minded individual would find the story blasphemous, although I find it exciting and thrilling. But to me, they're holding him in the same way that society today holds Thomas Jefferson, like he was some kind of martyr that could do no wrong. Of course, we know Jesus was, was the perfect person. He was flawless, so to speak. But so many in our society today, and I just, the parallel between those two men, just, amuses me.
I agree with you somewhat, Harriet, but I feel that when people hold Jesus on such a high pedestal that he could do no wrong, that to me does not, for me personally, doesn't make it seem that special. On the other hand, seeing and feeling and believing that Jesus walked this earth and had the same temptations that we as human beings, the same urges and desires that we face as human beings, wanting to be with somebody, wanting to be married, wanting to have children, all of those things. To me, him then accomplishing and doing what he did makes him all that more special. And that may sound kind of, I don't know exactly the words to put it, but to me, someone is special when they've gone through all the trials and tribulations that we go through, and yet at the same time are able to hold that space within themselves of the beautiful gifts and their own divinity, which metaphysically, what we're talking about is each one of us are divine beings. The only difference between us and individuals like the Buddha, Jesus, and any of the other saints that we hold in high regards is that because of what they've gone through, they also held the idea that I am dwells within me and is me, and I dwell within that also, and I can overcome these things. Whereas I think in our society today, there are people who still hold Jesus on this pedestal. And as you say, they would find this book blasphemous to think that this individual that they hold on this pedestal, would have the same desires, have to look for work, have to take care of a family, and come from a family with needs.
I was going to say, they're just showing this book, and even in some passages in the Bible, he's shown his humanity is being displayed, is put on display.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Jesus was an outlaw.
Right.
He was a disruptor. He was a bad boy. I mean, he wasn't. He wasn't anybody that that they have, people have turned connotations have turned him into something that where it looks like he could have done no wrong. Jesus did wrong all the time. He did wrong. He told his disciples to do wrong. I mean, he broke the law constantly, and it was said
he was a maverick.
Yeah, and it says it says in there that he was tempted by all things. He just didn't sin. Now that doesn't mean that he didn't have sex. That doesn't mean that he didn't have negative thoughts. It's just that he
knew how to control himself.
Right. And he understood the law, knowing the laws of the universe. That's the laws, those are the laws that he understood. So he couldn't break the law because he is the law. And I think that if we would I think that mostly people don't read the Bible, starting off with that. They listen to what someone else has said about the Bible, and they have believed what other people have said besides what the words are actually on the page. And if we have and if we would reconsider what it is that we have thought. It has been known. It has been written about for a long time that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married, that they had a whole family, that their bloodline in France. So I don't think that people would find that this is, I guess maybe somebody might find it sacrilegious, but like that. For me, Jesus is such a sub-character of the story. The main character in the story is Anna, because Anna does more stuff than Jesus did. Anna can already see that Jesus is going to show up this evening. She said, get ready because Jesus is coming. She's the strong one. She's the loving one. She's the kind one. And Jesus is kind of almost like bumbling. He's still not sure of who he is yet. So like I said, it's a good story. I think that she's a good writer, you know, but this is just me, y'all know how I feel about historical characters,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, because I think that, when we really look at Jesus was hungry, and I really don't, when you think about it technically, and when you read in scriptures, they weren't poor. They weren't. I mean, I would see them more like a middle class family. I would not have seen.
You talking about Mary and Joseph?
Right, and that family, that
Yeah.
whole family. I don't think that family was poor. We have been taught that he was poor, simply because he had, he was supposed to be God that came down to earth, and he left everything to come to nothing, which is would make sense here. But I think that like I said, I think that this is I think that she's a good writer. It keeps you, her writing keeps you interested. She, the way she sets up a plot is interesting, because I still want to know why is Judith, yeah, what's the deal with Judith? What that scenario is about? Where is Judas? He's got to eventually show up. So I think that the way she,
and don't forget that Judas Iscariot from the Bible.
Right, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So and it's already so much jealousy already set up in the story. Judith is jealous, James is jealous. So it's all of these things are already, all of these subplots are already set up. So the way that she creates tension for the audience, I think, is very interesting. So I think that she's a good writer. That's why I wouldn't mind reading some more of her works.
Okay.
Well, okay. Well, yeah. Let's see. Nothing for tomorrow. Now on Saturday we have what did we say yesterday? The book of Enoch.
Book of Enoch.
Yeah, we were going to continue in the second section of the book of Enoch. So I'm really interested in finding out what's going on there, because that's a cast of characters too. Trying to figure out what they're doing. So anyway, that's amusing. Then on Sunday, so that's from 2 to 4 on Saturday. On Sunday is A Science of Mind. That's also from 2 to 4. And
right.
And then don't forget, we're gonna go to the Gnostic. What is the name of their organization? Do you know?
Yeah, it's the it's the American Gnostic Association, I think.
The American Gnostic Association. So we're going to go and have a little field trip on the 27th of May. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, and I think it's so good when different groups of like-minded people come together so that we can fit all of the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, that'll be interesting, because it's going to be at Yogaville, and our group, metaphysical group, and the Gnostic group. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I think that if everybody did that and just would be allowing of one another, and I think that this is what this story is also showing, is how when different groups that seem to be opposing come together for a more desired purpose. Yeah.
Come together with the dialogue to come to come to understand each other.
Yes. So this is really interesting, and so we have an opportunity to live that, and I think that that's so valuable and so important.
It is.
But that's it for this evening. Would anyone like to close us out in prayer?
Before we do, don't forget to subscribe,
Oh,
like,
yes.
and comment on our YouTube page, our YouTube channel. And you can find Inner Haven on YouTube, and it's the little round little green circle with the white eye in the middle, white letter I in the middle.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Well, I can pray us out. So there is only one source. That source is love, light, energy, goodness, peace, mercy, love. That source lives in us. And as we meld our thoughts, our hearts, and our minds with that oneness of source, we too become one in all. And we learn through that the vibrations of love shift into frequencies. Those frequencies become solid and to form. And if we allow ourselves to be like Jesus and to allow that manifestation of love to shine through each and every one of us, we can release the wholeness, the peace, the mercy, and the love, so that we will be united as the Christ, as the body of Christ within this world and within this time and within this this realm. And with that, I say, and so it is.
So it is. Well, bless each one of
Okay.
you.
All righty then, ladies. Love you. Bye.
Love you too. Bye.
Love you all. Night.
Night.